Ethan Carter, a brilliant and determined entrepreneur, has built his company, Carter Innovations, from the ground up. Yet, on the brink of a life-changing opportunity, a simple trip to the airport takes an unexpected turn. Faced with bias and exclusion, Ethan must choose how to respond. What begins as a personal affront quickly transforms into a journey that challenges an entire industry and reveals the true power of resilience and leadership. Through moments of doubt and triumph, allies and adversaries, Ethan's path is one of growth, determination, and hope. But will his efforts to spark change succeed, or will the weight of opposition prove too heavy to bear? Join us as we explore Ethan's inspiring story, one that proves the greatest victories often come from the hardest fights. The warm California sun beamed through the windows of Ethan Carter's modest but stylish home. The open-plan living room overlooked a small but lush backyard where his 6-year-old daughter, Clara, was arranging a tea party for her teddy bears. Inside, Ethan adjusted his silk tie, taking one last look in the hallway mirror. His reflection stared back at him, a tall, broad-shouldered man with deep brown eyes that carried a mix of confidence and weariness. This morning, his thoughts were not on the pivotal business deal awaiting him in New York, but on the strength it had taken to get here. The house, though not sprawling, was his pride. It symbolized years of resilience and sacrifice. Every piece of furniture told a story. The weathered couch was the first thing he bought after landing his initial contract. The framed art on the wall was a gift from Clara after her preschool finger painting phase. The mortgage on this home had once felt insurmountable, but Ethan had chipped away at it, dollar by dollar, until it became fully his. "Daddy, will you be back by bedtime?" Clara's voice broke into his thoughts. Ethan crouched down to her level, smoothing her curly hair with a gentle hand. "I will do my best, sweetheart. You be good for Annie Lauren, okay?" Clara nodded solemnly, her tiny hands clutching a stuffed rabbit. "Promise to bring me a souvenir?" Ethan chuckled, his deep voice resonating warmly. "You bet." Something sparkly. Minutes later, his Tesla hummed to life as he drove toward the private terminal at LAX. The car's smooth ride offered little distraction from the swarm of thoughts in his mind. The deal he was flying out to secure could catapult his tech company, Carter Innovations, into the big leagues. It was more than a business opportunity. It was a culmination of years of dreaming and relentless work. As he pulled into the sleek valet area, Ethan felt the familiar dual sensation of pride and apprehension. Despite his success, he knew he would always have to prove himself in spaces where he was often the only black man in the room. Ethan handed the keys to the valet, a young man who looked at him with fleeting hesitation before smiling politely. He adjusted his tailored navy jacket and strode into the opulent terminal, his carry-on slung over one shoulder. The polished marble floors gleamed under warm ambient lighting. Around him, well-dressed passengers sipped champagne and reclined in leather chairs, their conversations laced with the kind of ease only wealth afforded. Ethan approached the reception desk, where a young woman with expertly styled hair was typing something on her computer. "Good morning," he said with a polite nod. "I am here for the Carter Innovations jet." The attendant barely glanced up, her eyes darting to his attire before settling back on her screen. "Name?" "Ethan Carter," he said evenly. Her fingers paused mid-typing, and her eyes briefly flickered with something unspoken before she masked it with a smile. One moment, Ethan stepped aside, the subtle weight of her dismissal settling in his chest. It was a sensation he knew too well. Moments later, a tall blonde woman in a fitted navy blazer approached him, clipboard in hand. Her expression was a careful blend of efficiency and skepticism. "Excuse me, sir. This area is for private passengers only," she said, her tone polite but firm. "I am aware," Ethan replied, meeting her gaze directly. "I am Ethan Carter, here to board my jet." She raised an eyebrow, skepticism hardening her features. "Let me verify that," she said, stepping away briskly. Ethan remained rooted to the spot, his calm facade betraying none of the irritation brewing beneath the surface. Across the room, he could see other passengers being greeted warmly, their presence unquestioned. The woman returned, her expression unreadable. "I am sorry, Mr. Carter, but without additional verification, I cannot allow you to board." Ethan's jaw tightened. He had come prepared for the possibility of roadblocks, but not outright dismissal. Checking his watch, he noted the dwindling time before takeoff. Instead of arguing, he pulled out his phone and dialed his assistant, Lauren Hayes. Lauren's voice came through instantly, calm and efficient. "What's wrong?" "I need the terminal manager here," Ethan said, his tone measured. "They are delaying me without cause." "Give me 2 minutes," Lauren said without hesitation. Ethan waited, his sharp eyes catching the subtle glances from other passengers who had noticed the tension. He remained outwardly composed, though a tight coil of frustration wrapped itself around his chest. True to her word, Lauren's intervention brought the terminal manager, a balding, middle-aged man with a harried expression, to the scene. The blonde woman trailed behind him, her face flushed. "Mr. Carter," the manager began, his tone brimming with deference, "I deeply apologize for the confusion. We will have you boarded immediately." Ethan nodded, his gaze steady. "Thank you," he said simply. But as the manager turned to address the staff, Ethan stopped him. "Not so fast." His voice carried an unmistakable weight that silenced the surrounding chatter. Ethan's eyes fixed on the blonde woman. "Before I board, I want to understand why I was treated differently. What assumptions were made about me that delayed my flight?" The woman stammered, her polished confidence unraveling. "I was following protocol." "Protocol or prejudice?" Ethan asked, his tone cutting through the room like a blade. The manager began to interject, but Ethan held up a hand. "I built this company to prove that barriers can be broken. I will not allow anyone to diminish my place here, not today, not ever." The room fell silent as the weight of his words settled over the crowd. The blonde woman's face flushed a deeper red, and the manager nodded solemnly. "We will address this immediately, Mr. Carter." Ethan boarded his jet with a mix of triumph and exhaustion. As the engines roared to life, he looked out at the receding terminal, a storm of emotions swirling within him. For years, Ethan had fought to claim his space in a world that often doubted him. Today's encounter was a reminder that the fight was not over, but it was also a testament to the power of perseverance. As the jet ascended into the clouds, Ethan opened his laptop and began drafting a statement. He would turn this moment into a catalyst for change. The jet climbed higher, cutting through the sky with ease, but Ethan Carter's mind was anything but calm. Reclining in the plush leather seat of his private jet, he stared at the blinking cursor on his laptop screen. Words flowed in fragments, his emotions too raw for coherence. He leaned back, running a hand over his face as he replayed the confrontation at the terminal. Why did it still feel so heavy? He was no stranger to moments like these: subtle glances, quiet doubts, the extra scrutiny he had to endure. Years ago, when he was a fresh college graduate trying to pitch his first tech concept, such moments had nearly crushed him. But he had grown since then. Every setback had been a stepping stone, every doubt fuel for his determination. Yet today, standing there in that gilded terminal, he had felt something deeper than frustration, a profound exhaustion. The cabin attendant approached quietly, her demeanor professional yet warm. "Can I bring you something to drink, Mr. Carter? Coffee?" "Yeah." Ethan looked up, her kindness a balm on his frayed nerves. "Coffee, please," he said, managing a faint smile. "Of course," she replied, leaving him to his thoughts. The hum of the engines filled the cabin as Ethan stared out the window. Clouds drifted below like endless fields of cotton, a serene contrast to the turmoil inside him. He thought about Clara, her innocent question about a souvenir echoing in his mind. How could he explain moments like these to her someday? How could he prepare her for the world she would face while preserving her bright, unshakable spirit? His laptop chimed, pulling him from his thoughts. It was a video call from Lauren. Her sharp features filled the screen, framed by her auburn hair tied back in a no-nonsense bun. "Ethan, I just got off the phone with the terminal's board," she said, diving straight into business. "They are mortified about what happened." The manager offered to issue a public apology. Ethan shook his head. "No public apology. This is not about saving face for them. It is about fixing the system that allowed this to happen. Lauren nodded, her lips pressed into a thin line. What do you want to do? Ethan hesitated. He had always believed in addressing problems head-on, but this felt bigger than him. After a long pause, he said, "Draft a statement. We will address this publicly, but on our terms." "Got it," Lauren said, scribbling notes. "Anything specific you want to include?" Ethan thought for a moment. "Focus on professionalism and accountability. This is not just about me. It is about how we treat people, regardless of how they look or what assumptions we make." Lauren smiled faintly. "You are a better man than most, Ethan." The words caught him off guard. "What do you mean?" "I mean," she said, leaning closer to the screen, "you could have raised hell back there. Most people would have. But you kept your composure. That matters." Ethan gave her a small nod, the weight in his chest easing just a fraction. "Thanks, Lauren. I will let you know when I have the draft ready." As the call ended, the attendant returned with his coffee. "Anything else I can get for you, sir?" Ethan shook his head. "No, thank you. This is perfect." She hesitated for a moment, as if debating whether to speak. Then, in a quieter voice, she said, "I heard about what happened at the terminal. For what it is worth, I'm sorry you had to go through that." Ethan looked at her, surprised by the sincerity in her tone. "Thank you," he said softly. "It is just, people should not have to deal with that kind of treatment," she added, her cheeks coloring slightly as if she had said too much. Her words stayed with him long after she left. The unexpected kindness of a stranger had a way of cutting through his defenses, reminding him that not everyone carried the same prejudices. As the jet began its descent into New York, Ethan's resolve hardened. He would not let the incident define him, but he also would not let it slide into obscurity. Moments like these demanded action not for the sake of personal vindication, but for the countless others who faced similar battles without the platform or privilege to fight back. By the time the wheels touched the runway, Ethan had a clear vision of what he wanted to say. The car that picked him up from the airport was sleek and efficient, a black SUV driven by a polite chauffeur. As the city skyline loomed closer, Ethan allowed himself a moment to take in its grandeur. New York always felt electric, alive with possibility. The boardroom at Carter Innovation's Manhattan office was already buzzing when Ethan arrived. His team of executives and advisors greeted him with a mixture of relief and anticipation. "Ethan, we are glad you made it," said James, his chief operations officer, as they shook hands. "Barely," Ethan replied, a wry smile playing on his lips. "Let us get to work." The meeting was long and grueling, filled with projections, strategies, and negotiations. Yet, even as they dissected spreadsheets and pitched ideas, the earlier events lingered in the back of Ethan's mind. When the meeting finally adjourned, Ethan stayed behind, drafting his statement on the large whiteboard that dominated the room. He wrote and rewrote, erasing and refining until the words felt right. Lauren, who had stayed late to assist, read over his shoulder. "It is strong," she said, "direct but constructive." Ethan stepped back, reading the final lines aloud. "Today's events are a reminder that our perceptions and assumptions shape the way we treat others. It is time to challenge these biases not just in aviation, but in every industry, in every corner of society. We must do better together." Lauren gave a small nod of approval. "It is perfect." Ethan sighed, a mix of exhaustion and satisfaction washing over him. "Let us hope it makes a difference." As they left the office, the city's lights glittering around them, Ethan felt a renewed sense of purpose. The road ahead would not be easy, but he was ready to walk it. The New York morning air was brisk, a sharp contrast to the warmth of California. Ethan Carter stood by the window of his Manhattan office, the sprawling city alive below him. The sun reflected off glass skyscrapers, and a sea of yellow taxis buzzed on the streets. In his hand, he held a copy of the statement he had crafted the night before. It had been sent to his communications team early that morning, and by now, it was live across Carter Innovation's social media channels. The message had already started to gain traction, with colleagues, industry leaders, and even strangers applauding his measured yet firm stance. Lauren Hayes burst into the office, her ever-efficient energy filling the room. "It's going viral," she said, dropping her tablet on the desk in front of Ethan. He scanned the screen, watching the likes and comments multiply. Headlines began appearing on his newsfeed. CEO of Carter Innovations confronts bias in aviation industry. Another read, Ethan Carter calls for professional accountability in viral statement. Ethan felt a mix of satisfaction and apprehension. This was bigger than he had anticipated. Let's stay focused, he said. This is not about me. It's about the bigger issue. Lauren gave him a knowing look. It's always about the bigger issue with you. That's why people admire you. Before he could respond, his phone vibrated. The terminal manager, Joseph Crane, was calling. Ethan hesitated for a moment before answering. Mr. Carter, Joseph began, his tone careful. I wanted to personally apologize again for yesterday's incident. I assure you we are taking this matter very seriously. Ethan's grip on the phone tightened. I appreciate the apology, Mr. Crane, but words are not enough. What steps are being taken to ensure this doesn't happen again? We're implementing new training protocols, Joseph said quickly. We'll focus on unconscious bias and professionalism. And, of course, disciplinary action has been taken regarding the individuals involved. Ethan nodded, though the tension in his chest didn't fully ease. That's a start, but it's not enough. If you're serious about change, I want to be part of the solution. Let's talk about real, systemic changes, ones that go beyond this isolated incident. Joseph sounded surprised. Of course, Mr. Carter. I'd be honored to discuss this further. Good, Ethan replied, his voice steady. I'll have my assistant set up a meeting. The call ended, and Ethan set the phone down. Lauren raised an eyebrow. You're really going to work with him? Ethan shrugged. Why not? If I can help prevent this from happening to someone else, it's worth it. Lauren smiled faintly. You never take the easy way out, do you? Ethan chuckled. Where's the fun in that? The day flew by in a whirlwind of meetings and updates. By the time Ethan returned to his hotel room that evening, he was drained but optimistic. He collapsed onto the couch, the city's lights twinkling outside the window. His phone buzzed with a text from his mother. Saw the news. Proud of you. Ethan's lips curved into a small smile. His mother's pride meant more to him than any headline or accolade. She had always been his anchor, raising him to believe in his worth even when the world seemed determined to diminish it. As he settled in for the night, Ethan reflected on the journey that had brought him here. From growing up in a modest neighborhood where ambition was often met with skepticism, to building Carter Innovations from the ground up, every challenge had shaped him. And now, he found himself at the forefront of a conversation he hadn't sought but couldn't ignore. The next morning, Ethan sat in the conference room of a sleek New York office building. Across the table sat Joseph Crane, looking a little more composed than he had during their initial meeting. Beside him was Olivia Burns, the gate manager whose actions had sparked the entire situation. Ethan studied her as she fidgeted with her pen, her normally confident demeanor noticeably subdued. Thank you for agreeing to meet, Ethan began, his tone neutral but firm. Joseph nodded. It's the least we could do. We're here to listen. Ethan leaned forward. This isn't just about what happened to me. It's about the culture that allows incidents like this to happen. People should be judged by their actions, their qualifications, not by how they look or the assumptions we make about them. Olivia's eyes met his briefly before darting away. She began, her voice trembling slightly. I want to apologize. I made a mistake. I didn't mean to treat you unfairly. Ethan's gaze softened slightly, though his resolve remained. I appreciate the apology, but intentions matter less than actions. What are you going to do to ensure this doesn't happen again? Olivia swallowed hard, her hands clasped tightly. I'll participate in whatever training is required. I'll do better. Joseph chimed in. We're committed to making real changes, Mr. Carter. We'd like to work with you to develop these new protocols. Ethan nodded slowly. That's a good start, but it can't just be about one terminal or one team. This needs to be an industry-wide effort. Joseph's brow furrowed. That's a tall order. It's necessary, Ethan replied firmly. Bias isn't confined to one location. It's everywhere. If we don't address it systematically, we're just putting a Band-Aid on a deeper wound. The room fell silent, the weight of Ethan's words sinking in. After the meeting, As Ethan stepped out into the crisp autumn air, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. The path ahead would be challenging, but he was ready to face it. Change was never easy, but it was always worth the fight. As he walked toward his waiting car, a young woman approached him hesitantly. She looked to be in her early 20s, her hands clutching a notebook. "Excuse me, Mr. Carter?" Ethan stopped, his expression curious. "Yes, I just wanted to say thank you," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "I saw your statement online. It gave me hope. I'm studying aviation management, and sometimes it feels like there's no place for someone like me in this industry. But seeing what you're doing, it makes me believe that maybe I can make a difference too." Ethan felt a lump rise in his throat. He offered her a warm smile. "There's always a place for you," he said gently. "Keep pushing. The world needs people like you to lead the way." She nodded, her eyes shining with determination. "Thank you," she whispered before hurrying away. As Ethan watched her disappear into the crowd, he felt a surge of hope. The road to change was long, but moments like this made it worth every step. The familiar hum of jet engines filled the air as Ethan Carter's private plane soared above the Atlantic. It had been a long day of meetings, but Ethan couldn't stop thinking about the young woman who had approached him outside the office. Her words lingered in his mind, a reminder of why he had to keep pushing forward. The flight attendant brought him a steaming cup of tea, offering a kind smile. "Let me know if you need anything else, Mr. Carter." "Thank you," Ethan replied, his voice warm but subdued. He appreciated the genuine kindness. Moments like this felt like a salve on wounds he rarely showed. He opened his laptop and stared at the blinking cursor in the draft of a speech he had been asked to deliver at a summit on equity in leadership. His thoughts drifted unbidden to the early days of Carter Innovations. Back then, he hadn't had the luxury of private planes or polished boardrooms. The company had been born in a cramped one-bedroom apartment, its walls covered with whiteboards filled with equations, sketches, and half-baked ideas. He had spent countless sleepless nights coding, sketching prototypes, and poring over business plans. He thought of the late nights when he had felt the weight of doubt pressing on his chest, wondering if his ideas were enough to break through the barriers around him. He had faced rejection after rejection, not because his concepts lacked merit, but because those in power couldn't see past his skin. Ethan leaned back in his seat, closing his eyes. The memory of those days filled him with both pride and a sharp ache. It had been worth it, but the toll had been heavy. He thought of his mother again, her voice strong and unwavering as she reminded him to never let anyone define his worth. The next morning, Ethan arrived at the Manhattan Summit venue, a towering glass building bustling with activity. Inside, industry leaders mingled, the air buzzing with anticipation. As he made his way to the green room, he passed familiar faces, executives, innovators, and a few competitors. "Ethan," he turned to see an older man with silver hair and an infectious grin approaching him. It was Martin Greaves, an early mentor who had taken a chance on Ethan when few others would. "Martin," Ethan said, a genuine smile breaking across his face. Martin clasped his shoulder. "I've been following the news. You've stirred up quite the conversation." "Not intentionally," Ethan replied, "but it feels like the right time." Martin's eyes twinkled. "It always is. Proud of you, son. Keep shaking things up." The encouragement bolstered Ethan's spirits as he prepared for his keynote address. In the green room, Lauren was already waiting, reviewing notes and checking the schedule. "You're up in 15, she said, glancing at him over a tablet. "Ready?" Ethan nodded. "I've been ready my whole life." The stage lights were bright, and the room fell silent as Ethan stepped up to the podium. He took a moment to scan the crowd, his heart steady but resolute. "Good morning," he began, his voice firm yet warm. "I stand before you today as a business leader, an innovator, and most importantly, as someone who believes in the power of equity and inclusion." He paused, letting his words sink in. "But I didn't get here because the world was ready to hand me opportunities. I got here because I fought for them, and that fight has shaped not just who I am, but how I lead." Ethan recounted his experiences, not just the recent incident at the terminal, but the countless moments that had tested his resolve over the years. He spoke of rejection, doubt, and the persistent underestimation he had faced. But every challenge I've faced has taught me something, he said, his tone rising with conviction. They've taught me to persevere, to innovate, and to lead with empathy. And they've taught me that change doesn't happen by accident. It happens when we choose to act. The audience was rapt, their attention unwavering. Ethan continued, outlining his vision for a world where leadership was defined not by who had the most privilege, but by who could inspire the greatest progress. We must create spaces where everyone is seen, valued, and given the opportunity to succeed, he said, his voice steady. Because when we lift each other up, we all rise higher. The room erupted into applause as he stepped back from the podium. Ethan felt a wave of emotion surge through him, not pride, but gratitude. Gratitude for the people who had believed in him, for the challenges that had shaped him, and for the chance to use his platform to make a difference. After the keynote, Ethan mingled with the crowd, exchanging ideas and building connections. He noticed Olivia Burns lingering near the edge of the room, clearly hesitant to approach. "Olivia," he called, gesturing for her to join him. She approached cautiously, her expression uncertain. "Mr. Carter, I wanted to thank you for giving me another chance." Ethan nodded, his gaze steady. "We all make mistakes, Olivia. What matters is what we do next." "I've started the training program you recommended," she said quietly. "It's eye-opening. I didn't realize how many blind spots I had." "That's the first step," Ethan said. "Awareness leads to change. Keep going." Her eyes brightened slightly. "Thank you. I will." As she walked away, Ethan felt a flicker of hope. Change was never immediate, but it was possible, one person, one choice at a time. That evening, back at his hotel, Ethan received an email from the young woman who had approached him earlier. Her message was simple but heartfelt. "Thank you for believing in people like me. I won't let you down." Ethan leaned back, the tension of the day melting away. Moments like these reminded him why he fought so hard, why he couldn't stop. As the city lights twinkled outside, Ethan allowed himself a rare moment of peace. He had come a long way, but there was still so much further to go. And he was ready. The faint glow of Ethan Carter's laptop illuminated the darkened cabin of his jet as it sped through the night sky. The city lights of New York had long since disappeared below, replaced by the inky vastness of the Atlantic. Despite the quiet hum of the engines, Ethan's mind was far from restful. The summit had been a triumph. His speech had resonated, and the ripple effect was already evident. Messages poured in from industry leaders, entrepreneurs, and young professionals alike. But with every message of encouragement came a flood of thoughts about the weight of the responsibility he had taken on. Ethan closed his laptop and stared out of the window, his reflection a mix of exhaustion and resolve. His phone buzzed on the armrest, a message from Lauren lighting up the screen. "Your keynote is trending. Positive reactions all around. I'll follow up tomorrow morning with a full report. Rest if you can." Ethan smiled faintly. Lauren was always one step ahead, a constant source of stability in his often chaotic world. By the time the plane landed in Los Angeles, the sun was peeking over the horizon, casting warm hues across the tarmac. Ethan stepped off the jet and into the cool morning air, his carry-on slung over one shoulder. A black SUV awaited him, its driver offering a polite nod as he held the door open. The drive home was quiet, the city still waking up. As they passed through familiar streets, Ethan felt a sense of calm settle over him. Despite the weight of his work, there was always solace in returning home. Clara's laughter greeted him as he stepped through the front door. She was in the living room, her hair a cascade of messy curls as she arranged her toys into neat little rows. "Daddy," she squealed, abandoning her makeshift town of blocks and dolls to fling herself into his arms. Ethan scooped her up, holding her close. "Good morning, sunshine. Did you miss me?" She nodded vigorously, her small arms tightening around his neck. "Did you bring me a sparkly souvenir?" Ethan laughed, setting her down. "Of course I did, but you'll have to wait until after breakfast." Later that morning, Ethan sat at the kitchen table, sipping coffee as Clara showed him her latest drawings. Each one was a masterpiece in her eyes, and Ethan nodded with admiration as she explained every detail. As they talked, Ethan's phone buzzed incessantly on the counter, a reminder that the world outside was still demanding his attention. But he let it sit, determined to savor these moments with Clara. Auntie Lauren, as Clara affectionately called her, arrived a little while later, her expression equal parts exasperated and amused. "You're supposed to be resting," she said, setting her bag on the counter. "Instead, your inbox looks like it might catch fire." Ethan chuckled. "I'll get to it. Just needed some time to recharge." Lauren leaned against the counter, her sharp gaze softening. "You deserve it. But I'll warn you, your statement is creating waves. People are starting to ask, what's next?" "What's next?" Ethan repeated, more to himself than to her. Lauren nodded. "It's a good problem to have. They're listening, Ethan. Now you just have to decide how to use that momentum." Ethan set down his coffee, his mind already working. The next few days were a blur of meetings, interviews, and strategy sessions. Ethan worked closely with his team to craft a series of initiatives aimed at addressing bias in the professional world. One idea, in particular, gained traction, a partnership with several major corporations to develop industry-wide training programs focused on equity and inclusion. The program, aptly named Taking Flight, was designed to be more than a checkbox exercise. It included immersive workshops, real-world scenarios, and practical tools to address unconscious bias. Ethan's vision was clear. This wasn't just about fixing one incident. It was about reshaping an entire culture. As the program began to take shape, Ethan reached out to the terminal manager, Joseph Crane. Their initial phone call had been tense, but this time, there was a genuine sense of collaboration. "Mr. Carter," Joseph began, "we've reviewed the proposal, and I have to say, it's exactly what we need. Our team is ready to implement the program as soon as it's finalized." "Good," Ethan replied. "This is just the start. If we can make this work here, it could set a precedent for the entire industry." "I agree," Joseph said. After a brief pause, he added, "And I want to thank you. Most people would have walked away after what happened. You didn't have to do this." Ethan's voice softened. "It's not about me, Joseph. It's about doing what's right." Word of the Taking Flight program spread quickly, drawing attention from media outlets and industry leaders alike. Ethan found himself at the center of a growing movement, his story inspiring countless others to reflect on their own biases and act. But not everyone was on board. Some critics accused him of overreacting, arguing that the incident at the terminal was an isolated event rather than evidence of a systemic problem. Others dismissed the program as unnecessary, claiming it was a distraction from more pressing issues. Ethan expected the pushback, but it still stung. He had always been his harshest critic, and moments like these tested his confidence. One evening, as he sat alone in his study, Ethan received an unexpected email. It was from Olivia Burns, the gate manager he had confronted at the terminal. Her message was heartfelt and introspective. "Mr. Carter, I wanted to thank you for the opportunity to participate in the training program. It's opened my eyes to things I didn't even realize I was doing. I know I have a long way to go, but I'm committed to doing better. Your patience and leadership have made me want to be better, not just as a professional, but as a person. Sincerely, Olivia." Ethan read the message twice, a faint smile touching his lips. Change, he reminded himself, wasn't about winning everyone over. It was about reaching the people who were willing to listen, to learn, and to grow. As he closed his laptop, Ethan felt a renewed sense of purpose. The road ahead would be long, but the steps he was taking now were already making a difference. Ethan Carter sat in the conference room of his Los Angeles office, surrounded by his team. The room buzzed with energy as they reviewed the final details of the Taking Flight program rollout. Charts, graphs, and action plans covered the table, and a projector displayed slides outlining the initiative's scope and goals. "This is the timeline for implementation," Lauren said, her voice crisp and steady as she pointed to the screen. "We've got commitments from 3 major airlines to pilot the program next quarter, with potential expansions by year's end." Ethan nodded thoughtfully, his focus unwavering. "What about feedback mechanisms? I don't want this to be a one-way street. We need real data on its impact." "We're building that in," one of his advisors chimed in. "Anonymous surveys for employees and passengers, regular performance reviews, and an external audit every 6 months. Good, Ethan said, leaning back in his chair. If we're going to push for industry-wide adoption, we need to set the standard. Lauren glanced at him, her expression a mix of admiration and concern. You're doing something big here, Ethan, but you know this kind of change won't happen without resistance. Ethan met her gaze, a flicker of determination in his eyes. Resistance is part of the process. If no one is pushing back, it means you're not pushing hard enough. The team murmured their agreement, and the meeting adjourned. As the staff filed out, Lauren stayed behind, crossing her arms as she watched Ethan gather his notes. Are you ready for the next wave of media attention? She asked. Ethan sighed, a small smile playing on his lips. As ready as I'll ever be. Let them talk. The program will speak for itself. The media attention came swiftly. News outlets praised the Taking Flight initiative as a groundbreaking effort to address systemic bias in the aviation industry. Social media buzzed with discussions, some applauding Ethan's leadership, while others questioned whether the program could truly create lasting change. Despite the mixed reactions, Ethan stayed focused. He spent long hours refining the program, consulting with experts, and meeting with industry leaders to secure more partnerships. The work was exhausting, but it was also deeply fulfilling. One evening, as he prepared for yet another meeting, Ethan received a message from Olivia Burns. She had been one of the first to complete the training modules, and her email reflected the transformation she was undergoing. Mr. Carter, the training has been eye-opening in ways I didn't expect. It's made me realize how many assumptions I've carried without even knowing it. I've started making changes not just at work, but in how I treat people in my everyday life. I'm grateful for the chance to do better. Thank you, Olivia. Ethan sat back, a sense of quiet pride washing over him. Messages like these reminded him that real change was possible, even if it happened one person at a time. As the weeks passed, the program gained momentum. The airlines piloting Taking Flight reported noticeable improvements in employee interactions and passenger satisfaction. Ethan's inbox filled with messages from staff members who had completed the training, sharing their stories of personal growth and newfound awareness. But with progress came challenges. Critics continued to voice their doubts, and Ethan faced backlash from a vocal minority who accused him of overstepping his bounds. Some executives resisted the changes, arguing that they were unnecessary or disruptive. Ethan weathered the criticism with his usual calm demeanor, but the strain began to show. Late nights and constant pressure left him feeling stretched thin, and he often found himself questioning whether the fight was worth it. One particularly grueling day, Ethan stepped out of the office for a rare moment of solitude. He walked to a nearby park, the cool breeze and the sound of rustling leaves providing a much-needed respite. As he sat on a bench, lost in thought, an older man approached him. The man wore a well-worn jacket and carried a newspaper under his arm. "Mind if I sit?" the man asked, gesturing to the empty spot beside Ethan. "Not at all," Ethan replied, offering a polite smile. The man sat down, unfolding the newspaper to reveal a headline about the Taking Flight program. He glanced at Ethan, his expression thoughtful. "You're the Carter guy, aren't you?" Ethan nodded, unsure of where the conversation was headed. "That's me." The man chuckled, shaking his head. "You're stirring up quite the conversation. My son works for one of those airlines. He told me about the training program, said it's making people think differently." "That's the goal," Ethan said quietly. The man leaned back, his gaze thoughtful. "It's a good thing you're doing. Not everyone's brave enough to take on something this big." Ethan looked at him, the simple words striking a chord. "It's not about bravery. It's about necessity. Things won't change unless someone takes the first step." The man nodded, a small smile on his weathered face. "Well, you've got my respect. Keep going. People are watching, and some of them are learning." Ethan thanked the man, his words resonating long after he had left. The following week, Ethan received an invitation to speak at a major industry conference. The organizers wanted him to present the early results of the Taking Flight program and share his vision for its future. As he prepared for the event, Ethan reflected on the journey so far. The challenges had been daunting, But the progress was undeniable. Each success, no matter how small, was a step toward the change he had always envisioned. When the day of the conference arrived, Ethan stood backstage, waiting for his turn to speak. Lauren was by his side, her usual efficiency tempered by a rare moment of warmth. "You've got this," she said, giving his arm a reassuring squeeze. Ethan nodded, the weight of the moment settling over him. He stepped onto the stage, the spotlight bright, and the audience silent with anticipation. "Good afternoon," he began, his voice steady. "Today, I want to talk about what it means to take flight not just in the literal sense, but in the sense of rising above the limitations we place on ourselves and each other." The room hung on his every word as he shared the program's successes, the challenges they had faced, and the lives that had already begun to change. "But this is just the beginning," he concluded. "Real change doesn't happen overnight, and it doesn't happen in isolation. It takes all of us working together, challenging our assumptions, and believing in the possibility of something better." As the audience erupted into applause, Ethan felt a renewed sense of purpose. The road ahead was still long, but he knew he was on the right path. Ethan Carter lingered backstage after his speech, the applause from the audience still echoing in his mind. The conference had been a success. Dozens of industry leaders approached him afterward, eager to discuss how they could implement the Taking Flight program in their organizations. Yet, amidst the encouragement, Ethan couldn't ignore the weight of what lay ahead. Lauren appeared by his side, holding a folder of notes from the day's sessions. "You've started something big," she said, her tone softer than usual. "But you're going to need allies if you want to keep this momentum going." Ethan nodded, her words echoing his own thoughts. He had spent years building Carter Innovations from the ground up, but this fight wasn't one he could tackle alone. It was time to extend a hand even to those he might not have considered before. Back at the office, Ethan sat in the quiet of his corner desk, the city lights twinkling outside the window. His laptop screen displayed a list of names: executives, industry leaders, even critics. Among them was Olivia Burns. He had kept her on the list, uncertain of whether reaching out to her again was worth the effort. He tapped his fingers against the desk, thinking of the email she had sent him after her training. It had been genuine, reflective, and even hopeful. Despite her initial actions, she was trying to change. The next morning, Ethan asked Lauren to arrange a meeting with Olivia. "You're inviting her here?" Lauren asked, raising an eyebrow. "Yes," Ethan said firmly. "She has insights I need, and I want to know if her perspective has really shifted." Lauren gave a skeptical nod, but didn't push further. A week later, Olivia sat across from Ethan in the Carter Innovations boardroom. She looked nervous but determined, her posture straight and her hands folded neatly on the table. "Thank you for coming," Ethan began, his tone measured. "Thank you for inviting me," she replied. "I didn't expect it, but I'm grateful for the chance." Ethan leaned forward, his gaze steady. "I want to know what you've learned since that day at the terminal." Olivia took a deep breath, her cheeks flushing slightly. "A lot," she admitted. "The training made me realize how many assumptions I've carried and how those assumptions have hurt people, even when I didn't mean them to." "And now?" Ethan asked. "I'm working on it," she said, her voice firm. "I know I can't undo the past, but I can change how I move forward. That's what I've been trying to do." Ethan studied her for a moment, then nodded. "Good. Because I'm going to need people who understand both sides of this issue. People who can help bridge the gap." Olivia's eyes widened slightly. "You want me to help?" "I want you to use what you've learned to make a difference," Ethan said. "If you're willing." There was a long pause before Olivia nodded, a flicker of determination crossing her face. "I am." Word of Ethan's partnership with Olivia spread quickly, drawing mixed reactions. Some applauded his decision to offer her a second chance, while others criticized him for working with someone who had been part of the problem. Ethan expected the backlash, but he stood by his choice. "Change requires understanding," he said in an interview. "And understanding requires dialogue even with those we disagree with." As Olivia began working with the Taking Flight team, her contributions proved invaluable. Her firsthand experience with the industry's biases gave her insights that others couldn't offer. Over time, she earned the respect of the team, though she remained humble and aware of the work she still needed to do. One afternoon, as the team reviewed a new module for the training program, Olivia hesitated before speaking. "Can I suggest something?" she asked, her voice careful. Ethan nodded. "Of course. I think we should include a section on microaggressions," she said. "It's something I didn't even realize I was guilty of until I went through the training. But once I understood it, I saw how damaging it could be." The room fell silent as the team considered her words. "That's a great idea," Ethan said finally. "Let's work on integrating it into the curriculum." Olivia's relief was evident, and Ethan couldn't help but feel a small sense of pride in her growth. The partnership with Olivia wasn't the only bridge Ethan worked to build. He reached out to critics of the program, inviting them to discussions and listening to their concerns. While not every conversation ended with agreement, Ethan believed that every dialogue was a step toward progress. One such meeting was with a prominent airline executive who had publicly questioned the need for the Taking Flight program. The man, James Porter, was known for his blunt demeanor and resistance to change. "Mr. Carter," Porter began as they sat down in a neutral meeting room, "I respect what you're trying to do, but I don't see how this program solves the real issues." "What do you see as the real issues?" Ethan asked calmly. Porter leaned back in his chair. "Profitability, efficiency, keeping customers happy. Bias training doesn't make planes run on time." Ethan nodded, unfazed by the man's bluntness. "You're right, it doesn't. But it does create an environment where employees feel valued and passengers feel respected. And when people feel respected, they perform better. That's good for everyone, including your bottom line." Porter frowned, clearly skeptical. But as Ethan presented data from the program's pilot phase, his expression shifted from doubt to consideration. "You're saying this improves customer satisfaction?" Porter asked, his tone less confrontational. "Yes," Ethan said. "And it improves employee retention, which saves you money on hiring and training. It's a win-win." By the end of the meeting, Porter agreed to a trial run of the program at one of his airline's terminals. It was a small victory, but a significant one. As the weeks went by, the Taking Flight program continued to gain traction. Ethan's approach of building bridges, whether with former critics like Olivia or skeptics like Porter, proved essential in expanding the initiative's reach. One evening, as Ethan reviewed the latest reports, Lauren walked into his office with a rare smile. "You're making a real impact," she said, handing him a document filled with testimonials from program participants. Ethan read through them, his heart swelling with a mixture of pride and humility. Each story was a reminder of why he had started this journey and why he couldn't stop now. "Thanks, Lauren," he said, his voice quiet but steady. "We're just getting started." The storm came as expected, a backlash of criticism from corners Ethan Carter knew would resist the change he was pushing. On social media, articles and opinion pieces debated the merits of the Taking Flight program. Supporters praised the initiative, calling it a long-overdue reckoning in the aviation industry. But detractors painted it as an unnecessary burden on businesses, accusing Ethan of prioritizing optics over efficiency. Sitting in his office late one evening, Ethan scrolled through the comments under an article about the program. Words like woke nonsense and empty virtue signaling leaped off the screen. A particularly harsh post accused him of using the program to boost his public image, claiming he didn't actually care about the employees or passengers he claimed to represent. Ethan set his phone down and rubbed his temples, the tension building in his chest. It wasn't the first time he had faced criticism, but the sheer volume of it felt overwhelming. His shoulders felt heavier, the weight of the responsibility pressing down on him. Lauren Hayes appeared in the doorway, a cup of tea in hand. She had a knack for knowing when Ethan needed grounding. Without a word, she placed the cup on his desk and sat in the chair across from him. "You've been doom scrolling, haven't you?" she asked, her tone a mix of concern and gentle reproach. "Guilty," Ethan admitted, offering a weary smile. Lauren shook her head. "You know better than to let that stuff get to you. You've seen the reports the program is working. Real people's lives are changing because of it. That's what matters." "I know," Ethan said, his voice heavy. "But sometimes it feels like no matter what I do, it's never enough." Lauren leaned forward, her expression firm. "Ethan, you've already done more than most people would even attempt. You're fighting a battle that was never going to be easy. But you're making progress, and that's what counts. Ethan nodded, her words providing a small measure of comfort. Thanks, Lauren. I needed that. Anytime, she said, standing. Now stop reading the comments and get some sleep. The world will still be spinning tomorrow. The next day, Ethan's calendar was packed with meetings, but one in particular stood out: a strategy session with Joseph Crane and Olivia Burns. They were working on expanding Taking Flight to more airlines, but resistance from certain executives was slowing the process. I think we need a different approach, Olivia said, her voice steady but thoughtful. Right now, we're framing the program as a response to bias. That's important, but for some people, it feels too confrontational. What if we focus more on the benefits, how it improves teamwork, customer service, and overall morale? Ethan considered her suggestion. She had a point. While the program's mission was rooted in addressing bias, its broader impact on workplace culture could appeal to those who weren't ready to confront the deeper issues. That could work, he said, nodding. We'll reframe the messaging. Focus on outcomes and long-term value. But we're not backing away from the core message. People need to understand why this program exists in the first place. Agreed, Joseph said, his voice carrying a tone of resolve. We can find a balance. As the meeting continued, Ethan felt a renewed sense of purpose. Despite the challenges, his team was committed to the cause, and their collective effort gave him strength. Later that week, Ethan received an unexpected phone call from James Porter, the airline executive who had initially been skeptical of the program. Carter, Porter began, his tone gruff but not unfriendly. I wanted to give you an update. We've been running the program for a few weeks now, and I have to admit it's making a difference. Ethan's eyebrows lifted in surprise. That's good to hear. What kind of feedback are you getting? Positive, Porter said. Employees are more engaged, passengers are noticing better service, and even our managers are starting to buy in. I'm not saying it's perfect, but it's a step in the right direction. Ethan smiled, a sense of validation washing over him. I'm glad to hear that. Let me know if there's anything we can do to support the rollout. Porter paused for a moment before adding, You've proven me wrong, Carter. I didn't think this would work, but it's clear you're onto something. Keep it up. Thank you, Ethan said, his voice steady. I appreciate your honesty. As the call ended, Ethan leaned back in his chair, feeling a spark of optimism. Moments like these reminded him that change was possible, even in the face of resistance. Despite the progress, the storm hadn't entirely passed. An anonymous op-ed criticizing the program circulated online, accusing Ethan of exploiting the incident at the terminal for personal gain. The piece was harsh and deeply personal, attacking Ethan's character and questioning his motives. Ethan's initial reaction was anger, followed by frustration. But as he reread the article, he realized that the accusations, though baseless, reflected a deeper misunderstanding of his intentions. Instead of responding defensively, Ethan decided to address the criticism head-on. He sat down at his desk and began drafting a public statement. To those who question my motives, I hear you. My goal has never been personal gain. It has been, and always will be, about creating a world where people are treated with dignity and respect. The Taking Flight program is not about me, it's about us. As a society, recognizing that we can and must do better. Change is hard, and it often comes with resistance. But I believe it's worth the effort. And I hope, in time, you will too. After sharing the statement, Ethan braced himself for the fallout. But to his surprise, the response was overwhelmingly positive. Supporters rallied around him, sharing stories of how the program had impacted their lives. Even some critics softened their tone, acknowledging the sincerity of his message. That evening, Ethan sat on his back porch, watching Clara play in the yard. The weight of the week's challenges began to lift as he listened to her laughter, a reminder of why he fought so hard. Lauren joined him, a glass of iced tea in hand. You did good this week, she said, her voice carrying the rare warmth of approval. Ethan smiled faintly. It didn't feel like it at times. Change never does, Lauren replied. But you're making it happen one step at a time. Ethan nodded, his resolve renewed. The storm had tested him, but it hadn't broken him. He was stronger for it, and so was the movement he had built. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Ethan felt a quiet sense of hope. The road ahead was still long, but he was ready to face its storm or shine. Ethan Carter's office was a hive of activity. The Taking Flight program's success had propelled him into the spotlight as a leading voice for change in the professional world. Emails poured in from organizations eager to implement the program, and invitations to speak at events around the country cluttered his schedule. Despite the chaos, Ethan maintained his calm focus. He knew the importance of striking while the iron was hot. The aviation industry was only the beginning. His vision extended far beyond a single sector. "Ethan, we've got confirmation from the Global Leadership Summit," Lauren said as she entered his office. She handed him a sleek, embossed invitation. The summit was a prestigious annual event attended by CEOs, policymakers, and thought leaders from around the world. Ethan had been invited to deliver the closing keynote, a prime opportunity to amplify his message. "This is big," Lauren added, her eyes sparkling with excitement. "It is," Ethan said, a small smile tugging at the corners of his lips. "It's also a lot of pressure." Lauren smirked. "You thrive under pressure. Now let's talk strategy." The weeks leading up to the summit were a whirlwind. Ethan's team worked tirelessly to prepare his speech, balancing data, anecdotes, and a powerful call to action. Every word was scrutinized, every slide meticulously crafted. But amidst the flurry of preparation, Ethan made time for introspection. The summit would be his chance to reflect not only on the success of the Taking Flight program, but also on the journey that had brought him here. One evening, as he reviewed his notes, a familiar email notification popped up on his laptop. It was from Olivia Burns. "Mr. Carter, I wanted to let you know how much the Taking Flight program has changed my perspective. I've been applying what I've learned, not just at work but in my daily life, and it's made a difference. People I once dismissed without realizing it are now friends. Opportunities one didn't think I had a right to fight for are now within reach. Thank you for giving me the chance to grow. I hope I can continue to make you proud. Sincerely, Olivia." Ethan stared at the email for a long moment, a quiet pride swelling in his chest. He replied simply, "Thank you, Olivia. Keep pushing forward. I'm proud of the progress you've made." The day of the summit arrived, and the venue was nothing short of awe-inspiring. A towering glass structure with sweeping views of the city skyline. It buzzed with energy as attendees filled the sprawling conference hall. Ethan stood backstage, adjusting his tie as he waited for his turn to speak. Lauren hovered nearby, her usual composed demeanor giving way to a rare hint of nervousness. "You've got this," she said, handing him a small bottle of water. Ethan nodded, his gaze focused. "Thanks, Lauren, for everything." She smiled. "Go show them what real leadership looks like." As Ethan stepped onto the stage, the crowd fell silent. Thousands of eyes followed him as he approached the podium, the weight of the moment settling over him. He took a deep breath, then began. "Good evening," he said, his voice steady. "It's an honor to stand before you today, not as someone who has all the answers, but as someone who believes in the power of asking the right questions." He paused, letting the room absorb his words. "When I launched the Taking Flight program, I didn't expect it to spark a movement. I expected resistance. I expected skepticism, and I got both. But what I also got was hope that change, no matter how daunting, is possible when we come together." Ethan shared the program's journey, from its rocky beginnings to its growing success. He recounted the stories of individuals like Olivia, whose lives have been transformed by the training. "Change doesn't happen overnight," he said, "and it doesn't happen without effort. But when we challenge our assumptions, when we listen to one another, and when we commit to doing better, we create the conditions for something extraordinary: progress." The audience hung on his every word as he outlined his vision for a more equitable future, one where business is valued, not just profit, but people. "We have a choice," Ethan said, his voice resonating through the hall. "We can either perpetuate the systems that hold us back, or we can build new ones that lift us all up. The question is, what kind of leaders do we want to be?" As he concluded, the room erupted into applause. Ethan stepped back from the podium, his heart pounding as the audience rose to their feet. After the speech, Ethan was inundated with handshakes, congratulations, and business cards. Among the crowd, he spotted James Porter, the once skeptical airline executive, making his way toward him. "Carter," Porter said, extending his hand. "That was one hell of a speech." "Thanks, James," Ethan replied, shaking his hand. Porter nodded, his expression serious. "I'll admit, I wasn't sure about you at first, but you've proven me wrong. You're the real deal." Ethan smiled. "I appreciate that, James. Let's keep working together." Porter clapped him on the shoulder. "Count on it." That night, back in his hotel room, Ethan reflected on the day's events. The summit had been a milestone, but it was far from the end of his journey. The work ahead would be challenging, but for the first time in a long time, he felt ready to face it. As he glanced at his phone, a new message from Olivia appeared. "I watched your speech tonight. You inspire me to keep growing. Thank you for believing in people like me." Ethan smiled, his resolve strengthening. He had started this journey to make a difference, and now he could see the impact not just in the lives of others, but in his own. The path to change was long, but he wasn't walking it alone, and that, he realized, was what made it worth it. The weeks after the Global Leadership Summit were a whirlwind for Ethan Carter. The Taking Flight program gained more traction than he had ever imagined. Corporations beyond the aviation industry began reaching out, eager to implement the training in their own organizations. Media outlets continued to spotlight his story, and his inbox overflowed with invitations to speak, collaborate, and consult. Despite the growing demands on his time, Ethan remained grounded. He knew that the true measure of success wasn't the accolades, but the lasting impact of the work itself. One afternoon, Ethan returned home early, something he rarely had time to do anymore. Clara was in the backyard, her laughter ringing through the air as she chased bubbles floating in the wind. Ethan leaned against the doorway for a moment, watching her. She was a reminder of everything he was fighting for, a future where she could grow up in a world that saw her for her potential, not the limitations others might impose. "Daddy," Clara called, spotting him. She ran up to him, her curls bouncing with each step. "Hey, sweetheart," Ethan said, scooping her up. "What's all this?" "Annie Lauren got me a bubble machine," she exclaimed, her voice filled with delight. Ethan chuckled. "Did she now? That explains the chaos." They spent the next hour in the backyard, laughing as they tried to catch the elusive bubbles. For a while, Ethan let go of the weight of his responsibilities, focusing instead on Clara's unfiltered joy. That evening, as Clara slept and the house grew quiet, Ethan sat in his study, reviewing updates on the program's progress. One report stood out, a detailed analysis of the Taking Flight pilot programs. The data was clear. Employee satisfaction had risen, customer complaints had decreased, and retention rates had improved significantly in the participating organizations. Ethan leaned back in his chair, pride swelling in his chest. The numbers validated what he already knew. The program was making a real difference. His phone buzzed with a message from Olivia Burns. "Mr. Carter, I wanted to share something with you. Today, I was promoted to a leadership role at the terminal. It's an opportunity one never thought I'd have, and I know I wouldn't be here without the lessons I've learned through your program. Thank you for everything." Ethan read the message twice, a smile spreading across his face. He replied simply, "Congratulations, Olivia. You earned it. Keep leading by example." The next morning, Ethan met with his team to discuss the future of the Taking Flight program. Lauren, as always, had prepared meticulously, her notes precise and comprehensive. "We've got commitments from 5 new organizations to implement the program," she said. "That includes a major hotel chain and 2 healthcare providers." Ethan nodded, his mind already racing with possibilities. "This is good, but we can't lose sight of the original vision. Every organization we work with needs to understand that this isn't just about policies, it's about people." "Agreed," Lauren said. "I'll make sure that message stays front and center." As the meeting continued, Ethan couldn't help but feel a sense of fulfillment. The movement he had started was growing beyond anything he could have anticipated. A few weeks later, Ethan found himself standing in front of a packed audience at another major event. This time, the crowd included leaders from a variety of industries, all eager to hear his insights. "Change doesn't come easily," Ethan began, his voice steady and assured. It requires courage, commitment, and a willingness to confront uncomfortable truths. But when we choose to act, when we choose to lead with empathy and purpose, the results can be extraordinary. He spoke about the journey of the Taking Flight program, the challenges and triumphs, and the lives it had touched. He shared stories of individuals like Olivia, whose transformations symbolized the power of second chances and the potential for growth. As he concluded, he left the audience with a simple yet powerful message. We are all leaders in some capacity, whether we realize it or not. Leadership isn't about titles or power, it's about the impact we have on those around us. So I challenge each of you to ask yourselves, what kind of leader will you be? The audience erupted into applause, and Ethan felt a deep sense of gratitude. This wasn't just his story, it was a collective journey, one that would continue long after he left the stage. That evening, as Ethan returned home, he found a note on his desk. It was from Lauren, written in her tidy handwriting. Ethan, you've built something incredible, not just a program, but a legacy. Keep pushing forward. The world needs leaders like you. Ethan smiled, folding the note carefully. He didn't know what the future held, but he was ready to face it. The road to change was long and often difficult, but it was also filled with moments of hope, connection, and progress. As he looked out the window at the stars above, he felt a sense of peace. He wasn't just taking flight, he was soaring higher, lifting others with him along the way. And so, Ethan Carter's journey reminds us all that change begins with a single step, a single voice, and a single choice to stand up for what's right. His determination to turn a moment of adversity into a movement of progress shows the power of resilience, kindness, and hope. If this story inspired you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more powerful, thought-provoking stories that uplift, motivate, and remind us of the strength we all carry within. Together, let's create a world where every story matters. See you in the next one.